The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is an international human rights instrument that was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly. It sets out the minimum standards for the survival, well-being, and dignity of Indigenous peoples.
Yes, just like that.
The Declaration was developed through negotiations between Indigenous leaders and state representatives. This work took place over more than 20 years through United Nations working groups. Métis Nation leaders, including Clément Chartier, participated in these working groups and advocated for strong language to be reflected in the Declaration that would promote the rights of Indigenous peoples. The result? The most comprehensive international instrument on the human rights of Indigenous peoples.
When I first started getting involved in 1976, I saw the need that the Métis Nation must not only fight for its own rights, but must also help Indigenous peoples in other parts of the world who are being repressed.
On September 13, 2007, the United Nations General Assembly voted to adopt the Declaration. Unfortunately, Canada was one of the only 4 countries to vote against the resolution. Nonetheless, the same Conservative government reversed this position and issued a formal statement of support for the Declaration in 2010 with reservations. On May 10, 2016, Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs Carolyn Bennett announced that for the first time, Canada was a full supporter, without qualification, of the UN Declaration.
I'm here to announce, on behalf of Canada, that we are now a full supporter of the Declaration without qualification.
I can tell you, it's the first time ever that there was a standing ovation in the United Nations General Assembly Hall. So it was a very important moment.
We have come a long way in our quest for securing our rightful place within the world community and within our respective homelands.
As part of their full endorsement of the Declaration, the Liberal government and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau committed to implementing the Declaration in Canada. During their 2019 re-election campaign, the Liberal government made a key promise to adopt legislation to implement the Declaration domestically before the end of 2020. Today, there is a global consensus on the UN Declaration. Each of the 4 countries that voted against the Declaration in 2007 have since issued statements supporting it, and no country in the world now formally opposes it. The Declaration contains 46 articles that affirm a wide array of political, economic, social, civil, cultural, spiritual, territorial, and environmental rights. The articles cover many themes, including self-determination and self-government, life, security, and health, culture, religion, and language, education, media, and employment, economic, civil, and political rights, rights related to lands, territories, and resources, and the rights of women, girls, elders, youth, and persons with disabilities. Importantly, the Declaration also requires Canada's governments to seek to obtain the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples before making a decision that would affect them, their land, or their resources. Indigenous peoples must be involved in a meaningful way in the decisions that shape projects and determine their viability, and their decisions cannot be ignored. This provides the foundation for a healthier approach to decision-making and more equal relationships between Indigenous peoples, the state, and industry. The Declaration recognizes that these are minimum standards, essential for Indigenous peoples to exercise their right to self-determination and to live as free and equal peoples. While individual rights are protected, the rights affirmed in the Declaration are primarily collective rights. This means that they apply to Indigenous peoples together as peoples or as nations. This reflects the distinctiveness of Indigenous peoples and the collective nature of Indigenous societies. Nonetheless, there is important recognition of the individual rights of members of Indigenous peoples as well, such as recognizing the right of Indigenous women and children to live free from violence and discrimination. The collective rights affirmed in the Declaration also respond to legacies of colonialism and repression. The Declaration recognizes that Indigenous peoples have endured unique historical injustices that have long denied them fundamental human rights. Colonial countries such as Canada have sought to replace Indigenous culture and nationhood through policies of forced assimilation. The effects of colonialism are still felt today, and by affirming the collective rights of Indigenous peoples, the Declaration seeks to ensure that these injustices are overcome and that Indigenous peoples will have access to these rights now and in the future.
It's important, and it sets the foundation for rebuilding our nations and having our people flourish, once again, like we should.
In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission called on Canada's governments at all levels to fully adopt and implement the UN Declaration, recognizing it as the framework for reconciliation. The report of the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls came to the same conclusion. Canada is now a full supporter of the Declaration, and the next step is to implement it domestically, incorporating the rights affirmed in the Declaration into Canada's policies and laws, and putting meaningful Indigenous self-determination at the heart of state interactions is essential for the unfinished business of reconciliation. We can move past our colonial systems and towards a future inclusive of the human rights of Indigenous peoples.
I have real hope that this declaration, once adopted by legislation, is going to lay a great foundation for the Métis Nation moving forward.
The Métis National Council Engagement Series are designed to allow citizens and institutions and agencies of the Métis Nation to provide feedback and input on priorities and directions for the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. The Métis National Council, through its engagement sessions, are going to provide a bit of information and invite people to give their perspective and views. Going forward then, as the Métis National Council designs its advocacy strategy for the implementation, these are the ideas which will surface to identify the correct path forward.
I'm hoping that we have a lot of engagement, particularly the youth. I would hope that the young people who are tech savvy, take full advantage of, the social media opportunities to make their voice known. I see this engagement as an opportunity for our people to engage, but also for our leaders to get a good briefing on what it is our people would like to see